You ever find something you wish you hadn't? Something that sticks in your mind like a splinter, refusing to let go? I did. And it was just an old VHS tape. But what was on it? I don't think I was supposed to see it. I'm not going to tell you my real name. Let's just say I go by Alex, and I won't tell you exactly where this happened either, because, to be honest, I don't think I should have been there in the first place. See, I do urban exploration, abandoned buildings, forgotten places, stuff people left behind. Most of the time it's just empty rooms, broken furniture, maybe some graffiti, but sometimes you find things that make you wonder why they were abandoned at all. This place? It had been empty since the early 2000s, but there were stories, rumors that back in the 90s, people did experiments here, paranormal research, the kind of stuff that only makes sense in grainy VHS footage with distorted audio. I wasn't really expecting much that night, just another crumbling building, another video for my collection. But then I found it, and I wish I hadn't. It started when my flashlight died for a second. Just a flicker, but enough to make me pause. I gave it a shake, smacked it against my palm, and the beam came back, weak, but working. That's when I noticed something off to the side. There was an old cabinet, tipped over against the wall. Looked like someone had tried to move it and then gave up halfway. A piece of metal stuck out from underneath. At first, I thought it was a broken shelf, but when I crouched down, I saw the corner of something black. A tape. Not a cassette, not a reel-to-reel, an actual VHS tape wedged under the cabinet like someone had shoved it there in a hurry. It had no label, no markings, just dust, and a feeling in my gut telling me maybe I should leave it alone. But I didn't. I don't know why, but I shoved it in my backpack and got the hell out of there. I didn't even finish exploring. Something about that place, the silence, the weight in the air felt wrong. Back home, the first thing I did was track down a VCR. Not easy these days, but I knew a guy who had one. He sells old electronics, hoards them, really. I traded him a six-pack for it, and that night, I sat down in my apartment, put the tape in, and hit play. The screen flickered. Static at first, then the distorted lines of something recorded a long time ago. A dimly lit room, a woman sitting in a chair. A name appeared on the screen. I'm not going to tell you what it was. A date? Late 1990s. Then she started talking. And the things she said, I'll tell you about them. But not all at once. Because some stories need to be told slowly.
I've had strange experiences my whole life. Paranormal stuff, things I can't explain. But this was the worst one. It happened in February 1996. I had to travel out of town for a professional training course, and the company I was working with had a deal with a couple of local hotels. They booked me a room in one of them. It wasn't fancy, but it looked fine. I checked in that afternoon. My boyfriend had driven me there, and we spent some time in the room before he had to catch a train back home. We talked about my new job, my plans. Nothing out of the ordinary. When it was time for him to leave, I walked him down to the taxi, watched him drive off, then went back up to my room. As soon as I stepped inside, I felt it, like a weight pressing down on my chest. I told myself it was just anxiety, the stress of being in a new place, of starting something different, but the feeling wouldn't go away. I tried to shake it off, unpacked my bags, put my clothes in the drawers, set up my toiletries in the bathroom. But the longer I stayed in that room, the worse it got. I called my boyfriend, just to hear his voice. I didn't tell him how I felt. I just needed to talk to someone, to feel normal. It helped a little. Afterward, I went down to the hotel restaurant, had dinner, and promised myself I'd get an early night. When I got back to my room, I took a shower, pulled down the blinds until the room was completely dark, and got into bed. There was a TV across from me and a mirror on the wall to my right. The bathroom was on the left. I flipped through the channels, but there was nothing interesting on. Just static, infomercials, old reruns. So I turned the volume down and let the screen play in the background while I called my boyfriend again. "It's raining like crazy here," I told him. "I can hear the wind rattling the blinds, the rain hitting the window, it's coming down hard." There was a pause. Then he said, "That's weird." It was clear when I left. No rain at all. I didn't think much of it. Maybe a storm had rolled in after he'd gone. We talked for a little longer, then said goodnight. Before going to sleep, I got up and turned the bathroom light on. I never sleep in complete darkness. I've had too many nights waking up to weird noises, feeling something touch me, and not being able to see anything. But that's another story. I turned off the TV and laid down. That's when the nightmare started. I don't know how long I had been asleep when I felt it. A heavy thump on the bed, like someone had just jumped onto the mattress beside me. I woke up instantly, heart pounding. My whole body went cold. I looked around, trying to make sense of what just happened. There was no one there, but I knew someone had been on that bed. The feeling was so strong, so familiar. It had happened to me before, when I was a kid, and I knew what it meant. I got up, checked the room, peeked into the bathroom. Nothing. But the air felt thick, heavy, like the room was holding its breath. I turned the TV back on, not for entertainment, just for company. The sound was barely a whisper, but it made me feel less alone. I told myself I was being ridiculous, I just needed to sleep. Then I heard it, a dull thump from the bathroom. I froze, my skin prickled all over. I sat up, staring at the dark doorway. The sound had been real. I wasn't dreaming. And then I realized something else. The TV was off. I knew I had left it on. I had done it on purpose. But now the screen was black. I felt paralyzed. I didn't want to move, didn't want to breathe too loudly. I just kept staring at the bathroom door, waiting. I don't know how long I sat there. It felt like hours. Then, without thinking, my eyes flicked to the mirror. And she was there. Behind me. My reflection was normal. But behind it, standing over my shoulder, was her. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't breathe. She was smiling, but not in a friendly way. Her lips were stretched too wide, her teeth uneven, like some were missing. It wasn't a smile. It was a grin. She was wearing an old dress, something sleeveless, greyish, like it was from the 70s. Her hair, what little she had, was wet, sticking to her pale skin in clumps, like she had just come in from the rain. But the room was dry. My window was dry. There had never been any rain at all. I forced myself to look away, just for a second. When I looked back, she was gone. I don't remember grabbing my things. I just remember running. By the time I made it downstairs, the sun was starting to rise. I must have sat there for hours, too scared to move. At the front desk, they asked why I was leaving early. My reservation was for 2 weeks. They even offered me another room. I just shook my head. What was I supposed to say? There's a ghost in your hotel. I didn't care. I just wanted to get the hell out of there. And I never went back. I've had nightmares for as long as I can remember. Most of them faded over time, but between the ages of 15 and 20, one dream haunted me over and over again. It always started the same way. I'd wake up, or at least I thought I was awake, and see a shadowy figure standing at the foot of my bed, silhouetted against the faint glow of the streetlights outside my window. It never moved. It just watched me. At first, I convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks. But then the dream changed. The shadow wasn't just at the foot of my bed anymore. It was in my bed. I would wake up, or dream that I was waking up, feeling it pressed against me, its limbs mirroring mine. If I moved, it moved. If I breathed, it breathed. It had my height, my build, my face. But up close, the resemblance shattered into horror. Its skin was charred black, cracked like burned paper. Its eyes, no, the sockets where eyes should have been, were empty, cavernous voids. Its mouth hung open in a twisted, gaping hole, tongueless. But from its throat came a low, wet, mournful moan. And yet, in the dream I never screamed. Never recoiled in terror like I should have. I just stared at it. A heavy, tired stare. Like I understood it. Like I deserved it. Then, slowly I'd close my eyes and let sleep take me again. For years this dream followed me, until I met someone. Someone who made life feel lighter, brighter. And just like that, the dreams faded. But one night it returned. This time the shadow stood by my window. Its back was turned, but its head was twisted unnaturally, just enough to watch me. Then it did something it had never done before. It opened the window. That terrible, broken moan filled the room as it threw itself out. And I screamed. For the first time in years, I woke up screaming, clutching my chest as my heart pounded wildly against my ribs. And after that night, it was gone. Until last year. I ran to the window, breathless, panicked. And there it was. It hadn't disappeared. It hadn't died. It had been waiting. Below, twisted and broken from the fall, its limbs were bent at impossible angles, but it was alive. And this time, it screamed. Not that low, mournful moan, but a high-pitched, inhuman shriek layered with guttural, animalistic growls. The sound rattled through my skull, set my nerves on fire. Then, in a sickening, convulsing motion, it rolled toward the building and started climbing. It slammed its body against the wall, crawling, pulling, twisting itself upward at a speed that made my stomach turn. I barely had time to react before it reached my window. I slammed it shut, dropped the blinds, locked everything. And then I woke up. I thought it was over, but the nightmares kept coming. Worse than before. One night, I was fighting myself. A mirror image of me pinned me to the ground, hands around my throat, choking the air from my lungs. I fought back, clawing at its face, and the skin peeled away like paper. Underneath, it wasn't me. It was it. But this time, it had eyes and teeth. And it smiled as it squeezed the last breath from my body. That wasn't the only dream. For 3, maybe 4 years, I had the same recurring nightmare. I was alone on a train. An old train, the kind from the early 1900s. Dark wood paneling, flickering yellow lights, the faint scent of something stale in the air. Outside the window, rows of bare trees stretched endlessly under the night sky. And then, they parted, revealing a cemetery. A vast, sprawling graveyard hidden in the middle of nowhere. And then, I saw her. A white figure, small, distant. At first, she stood still. But then, she jumped. Not onto the train, but closer. From one gravestone to another, and another, and another. Teleporting. Every time the train moved, she moved with it. Faster, closer. And then as I sat frozen in my seat, she jumped one last time, into the train, right beside me, and screamed, a sound so deafening it split my skull. I turned my head, paralyzed with terror. Her face was pale, tinged with violet, as if drained of all life. Her eyes were gone. Her mouth hung open, gaping, a gory, torn mess where her tongue should have been. And somehow, she looked exactly like my little sister. But here's the thing. I never told anyone about these dreams, never spoke a word. And yet, my sister, who still lives in our childhood home, recently told me she's been having nightmares. Nightmares just like mine. I wasn't sure if I wanted to write this down. I've been living with this for almost 10 years now, and even now sharing it feels wrong. Like whatever it is, it doesn't want me to talk about it. But last night, something happened, and I can't just ignore it anymore. I'm a university student, living in an old apartment with 3 other girls. It's a small place, at the top of a building that's probably at least 50 years old. though our unit was renovated about 5 years ago. Last year, my roommate's boyfriend, someone who claims he has a sensitivity to spirits, visited our place. After spending some time there, he casually told us that we weren't alone. There was something, or someone, there with us. Probably a former tenant, he said. I wasn't sure how to feel. Shocked but not skeptical. Not after losing my grandfather. That experience had already convinced me that there's something beyond this world. And once I knew, I started noticing things I had never paid attention to before. Objects shifting slightly from where I left them. Cold drafts in a room with closed windows. That feeling, that deep, unsettling feeling of being watched. And, sometimes, the faintest sensation of being touched. It was never anything malevolent. Just small, eerie reminders that we weren't alone. I never let it bother me. Until last night. I share my room with one of my roommates. That night we both felt exhausted. It was strange, neither of us had done anything particularly tiring that day. But as soon as we lay down, it was like our bodies just shut off. It wasn't even late. Maybe 10:30 p.m. at most. And then, in the middle of the night, I dreamed. Or maybe it wasn't a dream at all. In it, I was in bed, just as I had been when I fell asleep. Except, something was on top of me. I couldn't see it. Couldn't move my arms, my legs. I fought, struggling with everything I had, but my limbs were pinned down, my muscles frozen in place. Even worse, I couldn't open my eyes. I tried, desperately, but it was like something was holding my eyelids shut. And then I felt it. 2 hands, pressing down on me, burning hot. I thrashed, panic swallowing me whole. My breathing turned ragged, but no matter how hard I tried to scream, no sound came out, only muffled, choked noises, like something was strangling my voice before it could escape. Then, I heard another noise. A whimper, a struggling gasp, and suddenly, I wasn't the only one fighting. The moment my eyes finally opened, I was staring at the ceiling, paralyzed, but I could still hear it. The same desperate whimpers, the sound of someone kicking, thrashing, coming from the other bed. My roommate. She was struggling, just like I had been. I forced myself to move, to turn my head and look. But then I saw it, at the foot of my bed. A shadow, not just a trick of the light. Something real, standing there, watching. I felt my pulse slam against my ribs, my breathing turned shallow. I wanted to run, I wanted to scream. But my body wouldn't listen. The only thing I could do was reach out. Desperate, I stretched my hand toward my roommate's bed, grabbing her arm. The moment my fingers clenched around hers, she jerked awake, and the shadow was gone. For a long moment, we didn't say anything. The silence between us was heavy, suffocating. She was breathing hard, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. And when I asked her why she had been moving in her sleep, she told me something that made my stomach turn to ice. She had dreamed that something was pinning her down. That she had tried to scream, but no sound had come out. That she had tried to open her eyes, but they wouldn't open. I didn't tell her that I had dreamed the exact same thing. I didn't want to scare her. And besides, she doesn't believe in these things. So I kept it to myself. But the next morning, I talked to my other roommate. I told her that something had happened. That my roommate and I had both had a horrible nightmare. And without missing a beat, without hesitation, she said, "Me too." The night before, she had dreamed of something holding her down. She had tried to scream. She had tried to open her eyes. But she couldn't. Now tell me, what are the chances? I don't talk about this much. In fact, almost no one knows except my mother, my sisters, and my husband. Because how do you explain something like this to people who don't believe? How do you make them understand that, ever since I was a teenager, I've felt things? That, when I was home alone, I could feel a hand wrap around mine. Warm, real, but invisible. That I felt the faintest whisper of breath against my cheek when no one was there. I spent years trying to ignore it. I got married, moved on with my life, and for a while it seemed like it had stopped. But then, my mother started talking. She told us about her visions. She had seen my grandmother, clear as day, even though she had passed away years ago. She had seen my brother who died at just 18. And that's when it hit me. I had inherited this from her. And suddenly, I remembered something I had tried to forget. It happened years ago, after my brother passed. My mother was sick, so sick she couldn't even move from her hospital bed. That night, it was my turn to stay with her. I couldn't sleep. I felt uneasy, restless. So I got up and leaned against the doorframe of her room, looking out into the dimly lit hospital hallway. That's when I saw him, a young man, leaning against the doorway of the room across from us. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment I forgot. I forgot that he was dead. Because there he was, standing right there. My brother, so real that I didn't even question it. I just assumed, of course, he was there. He had come to see Mom, and for the first time all night, I felt at peace. I lay back down, thinking, I can sleep now. He's here. He'll watch over her. The next morning, my mother looked different, brighter, lighter. And when I asked her why she was smiling, she said something that made my heart stop. Last night I felt him, my son. He was with me. And suddenly, it hit me, what I had seen, what I had really seen. I broke down crying. It's true, Mom. It's true. When I told her about the boy in the doorway, she didn't look surprised at all. That was the first time I fully accepted it. But it wasn't the last. There were 2 more times when I saw things that shouldn't have been there. The first happened about 3 years ago. It was late, around 1 a.m. I was still awake when I saw the bathroom light turn on. I assumed it was my youngest daughter, so I sat up in bed waiting for her to come out. But when the door opened, it wasn't her. A teenage girl stepped out, thin, long hair pulled into a ponytail, white pants, an orange tank top, a low-rise belt. She walked quickly, adjusting her hair as she headed toward my older daughter's room. I followed, thinking she must have been a friend staying over. When I reached the door, she was knocking softly. My daughter opened it, looking confused. I frowned, whispering, "Who is this girl? What is she doing here at this hour?" My daughter gave me a strange look, then burst out laughing. "Mom, what are you talking about?" I felt a chill run down my spine. I pushed past her, stepping inside. The room was empty, completely empty. The second time was more recent. I was lying in bed waiting for my 19-year-old son to come home. I heard the front door open, then close. "Is that you?" I called out. "Yeah," he answered. Relieved, I turned off the TV and started to roll over. And that's when I saw her. A little girl. 6, maybe 7 years old, wearing a backpack, walking silently out of my room. I froze. Then I called my son again. "Come here." He stepped into my doorway. "What? Did you see anything just now?" His face went pale. He glanced at the front door. I shut that when I came in, but it's open. For a moment, we just stood there, listening to the silence of the house. Then I forced a laugh, tried to joke, tried to make it feel normal, but I barely slept that night. I don't know why I see them. Maybe my husband is right. Maybe it is a parallel dimension overlapping with ours. Maybe they don't even realize I can see them. But I know this much. They've never harmed me. They've never done anything to make me afraid. They just exist, moving through the same spaces we do. And if I have to live with this, at least I know I'm not alone.
Dear inhabitants of the abyss, we conclude Alex's story here, but there are still many minutes left in the videotape. There are many stories to be heard, and we would love to come back to tell them. Let us know in the comments if you would like to hear more. If we get at least 200 likes, we will have even more spooky stories for you. What did you think of what you heard? Do you have similar stories to tell? Write them in the comments. We'll be happy to hear them. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and share. and we will keep telling you new stories all the time. But watch out. They are among us.